And so this is where it's kind of interesting, because we have to sort of acknowledge that and at the same time recognize what the impact of the internet on our mind is. Is anyone else experiencing anxiety because of the state of the world right now? I've been getting these really anxious and bad feelings for seemingly no reason these past few weeks. My chest is so tight and I can't seem to breathe. My colleague also had a panic attack last week on the same day that I had mine. I feel like the current Ukraine conflict mixed with the Roe v. Wade bill being overturned and the fact that it feels like all the progress humanity has made is being backpedaled in terms of human rights and fascism being on the rise, I genuinely feel like everything is hopeless emotionally. Logically, I know we can overcome any hardship and that I'm lucky I'm not in the Ukraine or even the US for that matter. But this feeling of absolute dread just won't go away, and I don't know how to get rid of it no matter how much breath work or meditation that I do. So this is an increasingly common experience that we're having. So the world appears to be changing, right? So like we like if you kind of look at the book of Revelation in the Bible, they talk about like all these signs that the world is ending. And I'm sure that this is in other religious traditions as well, but like we're checking a lot of those boxes. You know, there's like plagues and fires and floods and war. And if I remember correctly, the Antichrist is someone who pretends to be religious. And everyone's going to think that they're the good person, but they're actually the Antichrist. So it's like sort of like a false prophet. Don't quote me on that. It's been a long time since I studied the book of Revelation. So it sometimes seems like, you know, the world like is straight up ending and like things seem to be moving in a bad direction. For every step forward we take one step back, right? There's war over here. The economy is screwed. Inflation is an all-time high. 52% of people who are between the ages of 18 and 29 now live with their parents, and the number seems to be going up every year. Rent is hard to pay. You're like 30 years old, and like at this point, you were supposed to no longer have roommates, right? Like, and so everywhere you look, it seems like something is really bad and things seem to be getting worse. And then some of us are really awesome about it because what we're actually doing is like we've been told, okay, like breath work, meditate your problems away, right? And there's definitely a role for meditation, but no matter how much meditation you do, it doesn't seem to be sufficient. So if you're someone who's looking at the world and it's not just that the world is going to hell, it's that you are affected by this. Like even if there are things happening in different countries or on different continents, you are experiencing a panic attack. And so how the hell do you deal with this? Like it's one thing to have a panic attack because your specific life is falling apart. It's another thing to have a panic attack because of crap that's happening half a world away. And I'm meditating. So it's like, what do you, like, how do I, what do you even do about this kind of situation? It's like, how can you stop the world affecting you in such a profound way? Now, there are going to be a lot of like simple things that we're going to talk about. So people may say, just spend less time on the internet. I don't know if you'll know this, but spending less time on the internet is really hard. And it's getting harder every single year that goes by, right? And why is that? Why is spending less time on the internet becoming harder? Well, let's think about that. The first thing is that the internet is like literally infecting more and more things in your house. So like I recently saw at someone's house a smart fridge. So now not only can you hear about the war in Ukraine on your phone and on the computer and on your tablet and on the TV, but now every time you go get a midnight snack, there's some bulletin about the war in Ukraine on your fridge. Now it's even on the watches that we wear. Oh my God, I have a smartwatch. So now I can hear about the war of Ukraine here. I can hear about climate change right here. I can hear about Roe v. Wade being overturned. And, you know, soon, if we don't have it already, we're going to have smart showers, right? And so we're going to have smart toilets. And everywhere we go, it's going to be like there's going to be more access to the internet, more access to the internet. Next thing that's going on is that the internet is getting like more engaging and addictive because people are figuring out, okay, if I increase the volume of ads, people will pay attention more. So like the internet is like invading our lives. So we're letting it in half the time, and the rest of the time it's like invading our lives. And so this is where it's kind of interesting, because we have to sort of acknowledge that and at the same time recognize what the impact of the internet on our mind is. So let's just understand this kind of from a physiologic sense, okay, to begin with. So we have this system in our body called, we'll call it the stress system, right? So it's the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenocortical axis. So this is where we have this part of our brain called the hypothalamus. Then the hypothalamus sends signals to this part of our brain called the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland secretes a bunch of hormones. And it secretes a hormone called ACTH. And ACTH travels to our adrenal glands and activates our stress system. The stress system was designed to be a short-term system. So it's like most of the days I'm like out, looking for like roots and berries. And then occasionally I'll do a little bit of hunting if I see an animal trail. And then sometimes I'll run across something like a cougar if I'm in the US, for example. So like a mountain lion, okay? And if I see that kind of thing, my stress system activates, but generally speaking, the stress system gets activated for brief periods of time and has a sustained effect. So what we tend to see is that the stress system, okay, so let's like understand this. The stress system activates short term. So in the first 5 minutes, we get adrenaline. Adrenaline takes seconds to release. And then sort of like, 20 minutes plus, we get cortisol. And then cortisol kind of like activates for about 24 hours. Okay? So generally speaking, the stress system activates and lasts for about 24 hours. And the goal of the stress system is to keep us alive for 24 hours. So what we're going to do is short-term survival is greater than like long-term health. It's like an all hands on deck kind of situation. So one thing, for example, that the stress system does when cortisol activates is it causes muscle breakdown, for energy, for immediate energy. So let's just think about that for a second. So like if I have a muscle that is a certain size, I'm gonna actually break down 10% of that muscle tissue so that the rest of my muscles have sufficient glucose and energy to be able to run for an hour if they need to. So this stress system was sort of designed to be activated for brief periods of time and then like sort of get deactivated. Now what happens with technology is that our stress system is being constantly activated. So technology, so what does the internet do? Okay, there's the war in Ukraine. And for days and days, all we hear about is the war in Ukraine, war in Ukraine, war in Ukraine. And then what happens is someone on a news desk, somewhere realizes, okay, the war in Ukraine is no longer emotionally engaging. What does emotionally engaging mean? It means activates the stress system. Those two go hand in hand. So let's come up with a new thing to get everyone engaged in watching more. So they come up with something else. And so Roe v. Wade was overturned recently, so everyone's talking about that. Everyone is stressed about that. Everyone's going to be stressed about this for a couple of days, and then something else will come along that will be emotionally engaging. So not only is technology infecting all dimensions of your life, but all of the news sources and outlets and social media websites and things like that are all competing for your attention. And they'll do whatever they can to get you to click on their stuff. So what this sort of means is that our stress system is being activated on Monday, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, on Thursday, on Friday, etc. And so if you have something like a panic attack, what's going on there? Well, the first thing is if you have a panic attack, you have to be a little bit careful at assuming that it's just because of everything that's going on in the world. You should definitely get a clinical evaluation. But when we're in this high stress state, one thing that we know about a panic attack is that panic attacks are not, generally speaking, mental. So a panic attack is a physiologic response. And one of the hallmarks of panic disorder is that oftentimes they don't even have a trigger. So if you really look at the diagnosis of panic disorder, which is a DSM-5 diagnosis, which clinicians will use, one of the key things about it that oftentimes really confuses people is we'll see posts like this where someone is like, I have a panic attack because of what's going on in the world. And you've got someone else who's got panic disorder who like is walking their dog and is not stressed about anything, and boom, they have a panic attack. So it's a physiologic thing. And so as we activate our stress physiology because of our technology exposure, we sort of move ourselves in the direction of something like a panic attack. So what do you do about it? So I'm going to start with the concept of diet. So here are 3 things that you can do. If you find that the world is despairing, or the world is like going to hell, and it's affecting you personally, and you don't know what to do about it, okay? And so the other thing that I just want to mention for a second is that, so there's a great quote by Krishnamurti. I may get it a little bit wrong, but he basically said, being well adjusted to a sick society does not make you healthy. And I think that quote is so relevant today. So what's happening is we're having to adapt to a society that is getting worse. And as we adapt to a society that's getting worse, we don't end up actually as healthy. We adapt to our circumstances, but we suffer because of it. So here are a couple of things to really think about in terms of how to address this. The first is we're going to talk a little bit about diet, okay? So if I eat like Cheetos and pizza and drink beer or soda all day long, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, what is going to happen to my body? Right? So depending on what I put in, I'm going to see changes, right? So I'll basically like pollute my body. So what you'll see is all kinds of problems. Like you'll see, decreased energy, kind of sluggishness. I remember this very well in my days of ordering Chinese takeout, just huge amounts of Chinese takeout so I could reduce the cost of the delivery fee and then sort of have all this food piled up so that I didn't have to leave my room. And I felt low energy, sluggish, felt bad, leaned on unhealthy coping mechanisms. Also started to feel angry at like all kinds of things outside of my control, right? So this is what happens when you sort of pollute your body, is your body starts to like, not necessarily malfunction, like it will eventually over time if you do it over and over and over again, right? You can cause damage to your body. But depending on the diet that you put in, you're going to get a particular kind of impact. So what is our information diet? What do we consume in terms of information? So like these things are happening, right? It's not a question that these things are happening. It's not a question. Hi. Yes. Okay. Where were we? All right. So what is the information diet that you're consuming? So like as we put certain things in our mind will start to react emotionally. As it reacts emotionally, we will start to activate our stress system. As we activate our stress system, we will move in the direction of something like a panic attack. Okay? So this is where I want to share with y'all something. So this is like, so you need to basically control this system in a couple of different ways. So one is information leads to activation of the stress system, which then results in increased energy, right? Because you get ramped up. Does that, oh, okay, hold on. Let me just move this up. Okay, this is going to result in increased energy. And when our mind has a bunch of energy, we result in increased anxiety. So if you think about anxiety, and this is all like, if y'all have watched Dr. K's guide, this will be old news to you. So if we think about anxiety, anxiety is too much energy in the mind. Does that make sense? It's like your thoughts are moving really, really fast. So fast thoughts, circular thoughts, right? It's like if you've got too much stuff in there and it can't get out. Now, there's another kind of problem, which is that as we look at the world like this, what starts to happen is we get, these are problems that feel unsolvable. So the other challenge that we run into is when our mind comes up with a problem, why do we have a brain that can understand problems? To fix them. So if we think about like, even if you look at a primate, right? So like, let's say I'm a chimp. Chimps understand problems. They're like, oh, I'm hungry, or it's raining, or I'm thirsty. And then they're able to like affect change to fix the problem. That's the whole reason that we have feelings like hunger and thirst. So the reason that we have anxiety is to like try to figure out, okay, what are we anxious about so that we can fix it? Now, the problem is that our brain evolved in a situation where there were not global problems. So I even remember talking to my grandmother who grew up in a village of like 300 people in India. And the outside world was like a myth to her. No one ever left. Like no one had ever left on a country or been on an airplane. I remember one of the early, not the first time I went, but I had this very vivid memory of some kid asking me in the village. He was like, you came here on an airplane? And he was fascinated. And I was like, yeah, I came here on an airplane. It's the only way to get here. And he was like, an airplane goes really fast, right? And I was like, yeah, it goes very fast. He's like, how, like, goes like hundreds of miles an hour or whatever. And he's like, how do you not fall out? I was like, what? He's like, how do you not fall out of the plane if it's going? Because this person grew up in a village where the mode of transportation is a cart. And the idea of an enclosed like thing that you don't fall out of, like he thought that airplanes were just open on the top and you just kind of sit down like a cart. It's a great question. But this is the kind of world that our brain evolved in. It didn't evolve for a world with global problems, which, by the way, are unsolvable, right? So if you're in the US and you're kind of thinking like, okay, Roe v. Wade got overturned, like what can I do about it? And then you kind of look at the world and you look at like how everything is like, popular vote stuff and gerrymandering and the political situation in the US is like all going to hell. And so what can you do about it? Nothing. And so then what that sort of does is, generally speaking, the purpose of anxiety is to take action to correct the problem. But this isn't an option. So what we end up doing is just like bouncing back like into more energy and more anxiety. And then as we can keep on consuming stuff from the internet, this kind of goes in. And the good thing here is that you can meditate here, right? So that's where meditation kind of comes in. So how do we fix this problem? The first thing to understand is that this whole cycle starts with this. So what you need to do is go on an information diet. Now, this is really tricky because the business model of the people who stress you out is to stress you out. It's emotionally engaging stuff that causes people to click on things, right? So we even recently had a interesting post where someone was like, I don't like y'all's YouTube titles because they're clickbait. And it's like, yeah, we play that game too, right? So someone once told me several very successful YouTubers, I asked them, help me understand like how I can help people through YouTube. And what one of them told me, brilliant, said, you have to trick people into learning. You can't tell them. No one watches videos about, people do watch videos, but like, you have to trick people into learning. That's how if you want to help people on YouTube, you can't tell them you're going to try to help them. You have to trick them into it. Anyway, so it was an interesting piece of information. So this is where like literally the amount of time that you spend in this kind of toxic information environment is going to affect your mindset. So we can also look at this as in someone who, is in a toxic household. So if you're in a toxic household and you have like a parent who's like constantly emotionally abusive, the less time you spend in that household, the better you will feel about yourself. And what we're essentially doing is letting the toxicity in through all of our devices. And so you result in something weird, right? And this person even understands this. Logically, I know we can overcome anything. I'm not even in the Ukraine or the US. This stuff doesn't even affect me. But I have this feeling of absolute dread, right? So we have these empathic parts of our brain which we relate to the suffering of others. And even though we're not directly affected by them, as long as we're hearing about this stuff, we're going to be affected by it. So this is something that I think is underappreciated in terms of like motivation. And we actually dig into this. I want to just show you all this. So this is the new guide that we have coming out. So for those of y'all that have seen this before, these are the old guides, green, blue, and orange. So this is the motivation guide. And one of the things that we really emphasize in terms of controlling the mind and understanding how to like have a healthy mind, let me try to find it. Not this. Wait, where? Oh, here we go. It's over here. So, is an understanding of the Indriyas or the sense organs. So this is where your motivation is going to be heavily, heavily, heavily affected by your sense organs. Your state of mind is going to be heavily, heavily, heavily affected by your sense organs. So in the same way that, like, if you think about, you know, going to therapy, what happens in therapy? You have a different kind of sensory input. If you think about getting away from an abusive relationship, right? If you're dating an abusive dude and you get out of that relationship, you're changing your sensory input. Being in a healthy relationship creates a different kind of sensory input. So a lot of the state of our mind, like, I don't know how else to say this, but if someone if someone you care about tells you, hey, you're a terrible person, what is that? That's actually technically sensory input. That's what it is. It's the impact internally of the sensory input, but literally what it is a sensory signal. And so by cultivating the right kind of sensory input, we can actually alter the shape of our mind. So very practically, what does this mean? It's kind of simple, but, limiting contact to the internet. So there's simple things that you can do. So like, let's look at a couple of, and by the way, on the guide, we also sort of talk some about this, right? So we're going to go, there's videos about technology habits and how to develop healthy technology habits. We're going to give y'all some of that information right here and now, okay? So limiting contact of the internet. So the first kind of question is, first thing that you can do is don't take your phone with you in the house. So what we'll oftentimes find is I'll sit down on the couch and I'll scroll through my phone, and then I'll walk to the kitchen, I'll scroll through my phone. I'll use the toilet and I'll scroll through my phone. I'll wake up in the morning and I'll scroll through my phone. I'll get into bed at night and I'll scroll through my phone. So the purpose of the portability of the phone is it's fine if you take it outside, right? That's great so that you have a way to call people or communicate or whatever, but don't carry it with you throughout the house. One really, really simple tip. Okay? So it's fine to, like, if you want to read a news article and you sit down at your desktop or your laptop or whatever, and you're like, okay, like, now I'm going to look at the news, or now I'm going to browse Reddit. So in order to control it, don't take your devices with you. So you have to actively stop the invasion of the internet into your life. Second thing is, like, designate time for internet usage. Because what's happening is it's all over the place, right? And it infects every part. Like, so it's, I'm going to browse Reddit for an hour. That's okay. Like, I'm just going to designate it. So don't let the internet invade the empty spaces of your life. It's fine because we have to use the internet, right? Like, there's no way to get around it. But be very careful about letting it fill in all of the emptiness. And as the internet fills in the empty spaces of your life, this stress reaction will increase. Okay? So in the same way that we have to control our physical diet, we need to absolutely control our information diet. Second thing that we need to do is focus on the stress system. Now, this person already meditates, so that's fantastic. So there are some, meditation techniques. So one good example of this is Nadi Shuddhi Pranayam, or alternate nostril breathing, which we've been teaching for a while. It's really interesting because this has a new name in scientific circles. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the next year or two you hear everything about this thing called cardiac coherence breathing. It's alternate nostril breathing. So alternate nostril breathing is a great example. The cool thing about it is, since we've sort of come up with a new name and medical science has culturally appropriated Nadi Shuddhi Pranayam, what we're actually seeing is a lot of studies on it and the autonomic benefits of cardiac coherence breathing. So autonomic is the system that we're talking about. It's the stress system. So we want techniques specifically that affect or are targeted towards our autonomic nervous system. So this is where what we really want is pranayam. If you're talking about not just mindfulness, and qigong are probably your two best bets for meditative techniques, of which alternate nostril breathing is one. Basically, we want techniques that focus on the length, increasing the length of exhalation. And this is the common physiologic element for reductions in hyperactivation of the autonomic nervous system. So basically de-stresses you. Okay? So you do want to meditate. The problem is that you can only meditate so much. And if your inputs are still super high, like, it's not going to be enough. The third thing that we want to do is get this energy out. Because as long as the energy is bouncing around in our mind, it needs to be vented in some way. So you can absolutely do something like see a therapist, right? So that's one way of getting out anxiety and things like that. Especially if you're having a panic attack, you probably want a clinical evaluation. But this is going to be kind of subtle. But what I want you to do is take insufficient action. Really important. So remember that part of our anxiety system in the brain is I have anxiety, and the purpose of anxiety is to prompt action. The prompting the action reduces the energy. This is a high energy state, right? And so we sort of know that it reduces the energy. And so what it does is it no longer loops out. Now, we also sort of understand this in a couple of other ways, because we know that something like exercise improves anxiety, gets some of that energy out. But when you exercise, you're not fixing the problem. Does that make sense? Like, if I'm anxious about some problem in the world like climate change, and my anxiety is really bad and I'm on medication, I'm doing CBT and all this other good stuff, exercise doesn't alter climate change at all. What it does is decreases my energy. This is an approximation, right? So I'm using the term energy here as an analog for all kinds of different physiologic effects. And what we know is that exercise will clinically reduce anxiety. So what about this word insufficient? So the problem is that if I'm anxious about, let's say, climate change, what makes it hard for me to take action? It's not going to be enough. What's the point? So here we are when we're anxious. And what is the thought in our head? What's the point? It won't be enough. And it's this thought, this amount of thought of insufficiency. If you want to look at politics, everyone in the US especially has been complaining recently that our politicians are really, really old, right? They're out of touch with the young generation. Young generation doesn't vote. You ask a young person, why don't you vote? It won't be enough. It won't do any good. So what do you expect? So if you're anxious and you don't take action, that anxiety will continue to persist. right? So someone in the chat is saying, I'm 22, haven't voted once since I was 18, I don't care to. Right? That's your choice. My point is that anytime we look at a problem, and if we want to take an action that would somehow help, almost from this angle, what keeps us from taking this action is this thought. It won't be enough. So if let's say, if I want to get in shape and I feel physically unhealthy, right? And then like if I look at, let's say, taking a walk, why don't I do it? Because my mind says to me, it's not enough. It's not enough. It's not enough. Therefore, you don't do it. So the action doesn't get taken. So what I want you to focus on is insufficient action. If you want to transform your life, the most important thing you can do is start taking insufficient actions. Okay? Take insufficient actions. So if you're worried about the climate, go and like plant a tree. Like you can plant a tree. It's not hard to do. You can grow a seed, put a seed in a little thing and then go put it somewhere. Right? You can pick up trash in a public place, clean up the environment a little bit, and then you'll say to yourself, oh, but that's not enough. That's not enough. That's not enough. But once you start taking insufficient actions, you'll be amazed at what it does for you. It works on this energy principle here, right? Because now we're like sort of venting our mind. We're physically active. We're getting out of the house. There's all kinds of things that taking insufficient action will recruit. And then this is also where like over time, you'll start to learn a couple of almost spiritual perspectives about like, even if the world is going to hell, I did my part. Right? You can start to cultivate detachment. I can't fix climate change, but I did my part. And this is the cool thing about the internet. This is what we discovered here at Healthy Gamer through AOE, this concept of AOE healing, is that no snowflake thinks it's responsible for the avalanche. Because it's true. Right? So take some kind of action, whatever it is. Like, it's not important what you take, but just be careful about this insufficient part. It's okay to start with insufficient actions. And if you do these three things, if you control what is entering your mind through the control of sensory input, and in the guide, for example, we'll teach you specific meditation techniques to help you filter what comes into your mind. If you decompress your stress through particular meditation techniques like alternate nostril breathing, and if you vent your high level of energy, you'll sort of work on all three of these dimensions. And hopefully, it'll help you manage a world that appears to be going to hell. Questions? Someone's asking, does your anxiety help with social anxiety? I don't really get out much. So the anxiety guide is organized in basically two ways. We talk about some clinical stuff in which there's a particular section on or video on social anxiety. But the bigger part of the anxiety guide is that it teaches you the nature of anxiety in your mind in a non-clinical way. So we go over things like generalized anxiety disorder, treatment perspectives, and stuff like that, diagnosis of clinical stuff. But the whole point is that we teach all stuff like, I mean, I have the video right here. I mean, I have the thing, so I can just show you. So we'll also talk about things like, you know, evidence-based herbs for anxiety and things like that. But I think the main thing that I like about it is that it teaches you, like, you know, basics of anxiety 101, things like the effect of physiology on anxiety. So this isn't specific to social anxiety, but it absolutely applies to social anxiety. We'll also teach you things like how we respond to anxiety in ways that make it worse. And so, like, how we sort of like propagate anxiety by trying to control it. And we'll actually talk about that. We're going to cover that today in a post. So we don't, and before I forget, I mean, there is a segment on social anxiety disorder. But most of it is like the basics of like how anxiety works in your mind. Okay? So, R Terrible is asking, any advice for how to disconnect consciously for content creators whose job description is to be chronically online? 100%. So we have a content creator program where we have a coaching program for people who are content creators. And working with hundreds of content creators now, we've learned how hard it is to separate, because it's your job to be online, right? So that's where there's like all kinds of like important tips if you are a content creator or being online is a part of your job. So one thing is you have to be careful about what's logged in where. So there's even in simple tips, like, you know, when I log into my computer every day, I use basically the same login for if I'm playing Dota or if I'm streaming or if I'm reviewing like data from a research study. So I use the same login. But the truth of the matter is that you can actually create different logins where like Twitter is not logged in, right? Or like Steam is not visible or hard to access, right? So there's all kinds of stuff that you can do to like literally create dividing lines between work and like not work. That's also where there are like other tips that we'll have, which is that like, so for example, don't log into Twitter on your phone. So if really the purpose of Twitter is work related, then it should be logged in on your desktop and you manage your Twitter as part of your job. But then you're like, but if I'm not logged into Twitter on my phone, then ... Yeah, absolutely. So there will be a price to pay if you are not logged into Twitter on your phone. The question is the benefit worth the price that you have to pay? So sometimes that also means creating separate Twitter accounts, right? So separate your personal Twitter account from your work Twitter account. And I think it's like there's a lot of like limit setting, which becomes increasingly more difficult if you're a content creator. And there are all kinds of other problems as well, like that content creators suffer from because they don't have good boundaries in their life by virtue of their job. So another really classic example, I know this isn't what you asked, but it's something that we see time and time again and something that we've sort of learned, which is not stuff that they teach you in medical school, by the way, which is like collaborations versus friendships. So this is so hard for content creators because when someone is like, hey, do you want to hang out sometime? Is this a collab? Is this person talking to me because I have more followers than they are, or are they my friend? So like this like the tension between personal relationships and collaborations, because a lot of the collaboration success depends on the quality of the personal relationship. It's like they don't get to have friends that are separate from work, which is not exclusively a problem for content creators, right? It's just exacerbated or amplified. But there are a lot of people whose social circle and professional circle overlap. So there are all kinds of challenges that content creators face, which I think are actually relatively novel. So there's some stuff that we sort of know if you look at like celebrity psychology, but content creation is completely different because there's also all this stuff around metrics. So another challenge that content creators face is how do you know when enough is enough? When are you done editing a YouTube video? When have you come up with the right thumbnail? Should I spend an hour coming up with a thumbnail, 2 hours, 5 hours, 10 hours? What's the right title for a YouTube video? Should I spend an hour, 2 hours, 5 hours, 10 hours? Right? So the nice thing about many jobs is that there's like a start and a finish. Like even as a clinician, like I'm a psychiatrist, I have appointments. I have appointments scheduled from 9 to 5 p.m. And at 5 p.m. I finish my last appointment and I'm done. I'm done for the day. But as a content creator, even if you're doing something like, you know, making music, right? Like when is the song perfect? Can I work on it more? Can it be better? It's so challenging. So many challenges that a lot of content creators have. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with all these people. And thankfully, we've been able to help them substantially. But it's really interesting how the mental health challenges that people face are evolving as our world evolves. Okay. Great question. How do we deal with the guilt of not being in touch with the news? Great question. So what's wrong with not being in touch with the news? Why is that a bad thing? Right? So where does this idea that it is your responsibility to read the news or, you know, follow the news, what difference does it make? So I remember having a conversation with a family member of mine where they were like, you should read the paper every day. And I was like, why? And they're like, so that way you know what's going on in the world. You can't be a clueless noob. And it's like, what difference does it make if I know what's going on in the world or I don't know what's going on in the world? Like, what difference does it make if there are times where it makes a difference, right? So if, for example, like you're trying to figure out who to vote for, then you may want to understand what's going on in terms of like foreign policy and like whatnot. I'm not saying that collecting information is a bad thing. This is where basically there was something else that I'll tell y'all, which is that if something is so important and so huge, you'll hear about it even if you never watch the news or like consume the news in any way, shape, or form. So the tricky thing is that that's a logical perspective. The question is, why do you feel guilty? That's what's important to understand. Where does that guilt coming from? Or am I being and then like really like look at that critically. Is it appropriate to feel guilty? Where is this idea that I'm feeling? Because if you feel guilty, you feel that way for a reason. It's a valid feeling. It may not be correct, but it's valid. You feel guilty because you were taught to feel guilty, because somewhere along the way, a value system was injected into you. And you're not living up to that value system, therefore you feel guilt. So it's not inappropriate that you feel guilty because that's what you were taught. It doesn't make it correct, though. And this is the subtlety between a feeling that's valid and a feeling that's appropriate. Right? So like when someone gets me a gift, for example, for my birthday, and the value of the gift is $100. And if I grew up in a household where the value of gifts, the price tag on the gift, correlates with the love that you feel. And so I look at this $100 gift and I think to myself, this person got my sibling a $200 gift. Screw this. I'm mad at this person for giving me such a crappy gift. That feeling may be valid based on your internal construction. That's what you were taught. Money means caring. Money means love. And it's not entirely appropriate. And what we really have to do is be a little bit critical and exploratory with our value system when we feel a particular way. And that's how you free yourself of the guilt. It's not giving into the behavior. It's understanding why you feel that way and then deciding for yourself whether you are okay feeling that way in that situation.